subscribe and tap the bell. Twice a day, we bring you the real code of the samurai, not paraphrased, not softened. There's a virtue Inazo Nitobe placed last on his list of Bushido's core principles, and the placement itself isn't an accident. Self-control comes eighth because it's the load-bearing virtue underneath all the others, the one that has to hold, silently, in the exact moment everything else gets tested. You can believe in rectitude, train yourself in courage, and genuinely feel benevolence toward the people around you, and still fail completely the instant you can't govern your own reaction under real pressure. Bushido understood something most modern self-improvement content skips past. Discipline isn't a personality trait some people are born with, and it isn't a mood you either happen to be in or don't. It's a skill, drilled the same way a sword technique is drilled, until it holds under real pressure instead of just in theory. Look at how this actually showed up in a life like Miyamoto Musashi's. He fought his first real duel at 13 and his last serious one in his late 20s, more than a decade of near-constant exposure to exactly the kind of pressure that breaks untrained composure. A single moment of panic, one flinch at the wrong second, ends a swordsman's life permanently. There's no partial credit. What separated Musashi from the men he fought wasn't necessarily raw technical skill. Plenty of his opponents were formally trained by respected schools. It was that his self-control had already been tested so many times, under such real stakes, that by the time he stood across from Sasaki Kojiro on that island in 1612, arriving deliberately late to unsettle his opponent, he wasn't managing his nerves in the moment. He'd already done that work, years earlier, one duel at a time. Musashi spent the final days of his life writing down 21 short precepts for the student he trusted most, a work known today as the Dokkōdō, the path of walking alone. Even without quoting the specific translated lines, the substance of what he left behind is worth understanding on its own terms, a warning against seeking comfort for its own sake, against clinging to possessions beyond what's needed, against regretting decisions once they're made, against envy, against letting personal preference dictate your actions. Read together, they describe a mind that has stripped away every unnecessary attachment that could be used against it, because an attachment is exactly what an opponent, or circumstance, or your own worst impulse, can exploit. A man who doesn't crave comfort can't be controlled by the dread of losing it. This is where Bushido's version of discipline differs sharply from a lot of what passes for discipline today. It isn't about grinding through willpower, forcing yourself into a routine through sheer grit until you burn out. It's closer to removing the reasons you need willpower in the first place. Nitobe's description of the ideal samurai temperament makes this exact point. A truly brave man is ever serene, he is never taken by surprise. Nothing ruffles the equanimity of his spirit. Notice what's absent from that description. There's no mention of gritting teeth or fighting off the urge to react badly. Serenity, in this framing, isn't suppression. It's the result of already having done the harder work beforehand, so the moment of testing doesn't require a struggle at all. Compare that to how most people actually build, or fail to build, discipline today. The modern default is reactive, wait until the test arrives, then try to summon willpower on the spot, usually against a temptation that's been engineered by someone else to be as hard to resist as possible. A notification, a craving, a cheap shortcut readily available at the exact moment your guard is down. Bushido's model inverts this entirely. The discipline isn't supposed to show up for the first time during the crisis. It's supposed to already be sitting there, fully formed, because you built it during 1,000 smaller, unwatched moments that had nothing to do with the actual test. A samurai training in self-control wasn't waiting for a duel to practice restraint. He was practicing it during ordinary meals, ordinary conversations, ordinary insults that didn't matter enough to escalate, because the whole point was that the real test, when it came, wouldn't require inventing a new skill on the spot. So what does this actually look like? Practice instead of just admired from a distance. It starts with treating every provocation as information, not an instruction. Someone insults you, disrespects you, tries to rush a decision you haven't finished thinking through. Bushido's answer isn't to suppress your anger and pretend it isn't there. It's to have already trained your response long enough beforehand that the anger simply doesn't dictate what you do next. That takes repetition, the same way Musashi's sword arm took repetition. You don't develop this kind of self-control in the one moment you need it most. You develop it in the 100 smaller moments beforehand, the minor irritations, the small temptations toward comfort, the daily decisions nobody's watching, so that by the time a real test arrives, you've already rehearsed exactly who you're going to be. Practically, that means auditing the small comforts you've quietly decided you can't do without, and testing that assumption on purpose, going without one of them for a set period, not as punishment, but as evidence gathering about how much of your composure actually depends on external conditions staying favorable. It means treating minor irritations as free practice rounds for the major ones, instead of venting them the moment they arise. And it means making decisions in advance, the way Musashi appears to have done before ever reaching Genryujima, deciding ahead of time exactly how you respond to the provocation you know is coming, so that in the actual moment there's nothing left to decide, only something already decided to execute. That's the actual promise Bushido makes about discipline, and it's a narrower one than most modern advice offers. It won't make the pressure disappear. It won't guarantee you win. What it offers is the same thing it offered a swordsman standing on a small island, facing a man who'd never lost either, the composure to act on what you already know is right, without your own nerves getting in the way first, when it actually counts. It's worth being honest that this took Musashi decades, not a weekend of good intentions. He was training this exact discipline from the age of 13, refining it duel after duel, well into his own middle age. Bushido never promised a shortcut, and neither does the history behind it. What it promised was that the discipline compounds, that every small test you pass on purpose, unwatched, makes the next real one measurably easier to survive with your composure intact. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Twice a day, we bring you Bushido straight from the source, the real words of the man who wrote the code down, and the real warriors who lived it.